Hello folks, Dave Mayo here from HackYourGut.com, and today we're going to talk about something called frailty. Now when I say frailty or even a frail person, you probably conjures an image in your mind of somebody who is, maybe in their late 80s with very poor posture, a look of fatigue on their face, low muscle mass, probably very soft looking, low bone density, and if this person kind of tips over and falls, they're going to break a hip and it's not going to be pretty for them. But this is kind of a very archaic version of frailty. Frailty is essentially defined as an increased vulnerability to death or disease due to a decrease in resilience and functional reserve within one or multiple physiological systems. So of course this image I just mentioned is kind of focused around the musculoskeletal system. However, there are a lot of systems involved. Even in just thinking of that tripping, falling and breaking your hip, there's flexibility, there's balance, there's reaction time. But within that, there's also what's happening with all of our other systems, like our respiratory system, our musculoskeletal system, our cardiovascular system, our central nervous system, metabolism, immune function, things of that nature. And as we get older, all of these systems begin declining in function. So when you get older, you may be susceptible to pneumonia affecting your respiratory tract. If you are somebody who exercises, you'll notice that you are just not able to kind of get that good lung or oxygen exchange and carbon dioxide exchange within the lung because the system is losing resilience. Our musculoskeletal system, we end up getting sarcopenia, which is a decrease in muscle mass, and then we get osteoporosis, which is a decrease in bone mass. Cardiovascular disease in the cardiovascular system. Inflammaging in the immune system, which effectively just means we are more prone to inflammation and we are much worse off at fighting off infections. This is just what happens to us as we age, and it's important for us to kind of maintain these systems throughout our life so that we have them towards the end and we're not overly frail, a decade or two earlier, which we're actually going to discuss with a personal story in a moment. So it's important to point out that there are cross effects with all of these things. And going back to that physical frailty, you may seem like the picture of health, just right out of the box. Maybe you just left the house, but if you have poor respiratory function, you're going to have problems getting oxygen to your muscles and you're going to fatigue more rapidly. If you are suffering from neuropathy or cognitive decline, your muscle function won't work as well. So there are a lot of cross effects. These systems all work with one another. So it's important to point out that even if you maintain a couple of these systems, you're really going to be only as strong as your weakest point. So if you're somebody, for example, let's say you got very strong muscles, strong bones, but you have a really bad version of this inflammaging, if you get injured, you're going to have a hard time recovering from that. If you have cardiovascular disease, you're going to have the same problem because when we clog our arteries, we're unable to get enough blood flow to our organs and tissues to heal them properly. So frailty is something we have a very powerful ability to prevent, but how do we do that? So we have measures of frailty. It's really important to use some measures of frailty to kind of assess it as you go. Our classic measures are things centered around strength, like grip strength, walking speed, physical fitness, such as cardiorespiratory fitness, sit to stand time, supine to stand time, balance tests, and things of that nature. But we also want to look at what's going on under the hood. We have markers in our blood that can kind of tell us if we're more likely to become frail. With our vitals or metabolic measurements, such as resting heart rate variability, blood pressure, blood glucose. You can measure lung function with a spirometer. You can look at your triglyceride and other lipid measurements, inflammation such as high sensitive C-reactive protein and glyc-A. So we have all these measures, and it's really important that we kind of track these as we age to just see how the system works. Just a kind of little footnote, a few weeks ago I ended up getting COVID-19, and I was always concerned about long COVID and how it might potentially mess with my lungs, yada yada yada. I use a device to measure what's called forced expiratory volume, which is the maximum amount of air you can breathe out of your lungs, and I had measures for that, and right after I kind of followed how that changed, and Fortunately for me, I didn't have any decrement. It's basically right where it was before, and that kind of shows itself in my exercise performance. So we can use these things to track over time, things like blood glucose and your blood pressure. We can track these things over time to kind of see how we're doing and how much functional reserve we have so that we can prevent from becoming frail. We want to use these measures. We can look at the measures to see if we're declining, but then of course if we are declining, we have to use some method of reversing these problems so that they don't lead to frailty. So one of the really important things to understand with frailty is that there are really important critical periods in frailty. So if you're looking to prevent sarcopenia or osteoporosis, you don't want to just focus on what you're doing now. You know, what's really important in terms of maintaining high muscle mass and bone density is that during the periods where you attain peak muscle mass and peak bone density, that you actually attain high levels then, and then you continue throughout. Exercise is basically the easiest kind of perceptual way to look at that. You know, if you exercise throughout that critical period and then you stop, you're going to be more frail than somebody who did it all the way through. If you never exercise in your life and you do it later on, you're going to be more frail than somebody who's exercised for their entire life. So I'm going to bring up my father passed away this year in July, and he passed away of heart failure. And he was pretty good for most of his life. In his early 40s, he was a black belt in Taekwondo. He hunted. He had an active job. But he still had really bad cardiovascular disease. I'm 45. When he was 45, he had a triple bypass. And having to have that triple bypass made him bedridden for a while. And I remember him, like, when he was recovering from this, he was curling soup cans, you know. That was all he could lift. It was a pound, and that's all he could really do. He had this heart attack, and he just never really truly recovered after that. Granted, he did have risk factors before. He was a smoker, probably stressed out a lot when he was younger, and he had terrible sleep habits. And so, you know, this kind of, you know, all of this stuff happening to him, and he was still in pretty good shape in his mid 40s, and then once this, you know, this heart attack triple bypass deal, you know, he had open heart surgery as well. He basically took a slide. When he passed away, he was 72, and so all of the work he did up to that point was kind of lost, and he became very frail. Up until the last probably year and a half or 2 years, he didn't really think to exercise, even though we were pushing him to. And then at the end, it was very sad. I mean, he was very frail. He could not walk. You know, breathing heavy, just getting up from the couch and going to the bathroom. So this is something that's really important to address throughout your life in order to make your 60s, 70s, and 80s a little more fun for you. I can tell you one thing: if you just let yourself go in your 40s, your 60s, 70s, and 80s, if you even make it that far, are not going to be good. So what is the best therapeutic option? Clearly, I think everybody's going to know this, and that is exercise or physical activity. Exercise is more a specific prescription of physical activity, whether it be strength training or cardiovascular exercise or flexibility training. If you're just regularly active, like I mentioned, the things my dad did, you know, hunting, or your construction, or you have hobbies that are very physically active, those work as well. But the importance of exercise can't be overstated, because exercise effectively benefits every system and every potential frailty point within your entire organismal state. So we're talking, if you're doing cardiovascular exercise, your lung function will be maintained, it will be maximized, musculoskeletal clearly, your cardiovascular system. We even know that exercise helps with cognitive decline and inflammation, and of course metabolism, you know, things like type 2 diabetes. So if there's one thing you could do, and you want to live forever, well, not forever, but as long as you can, and you want to be happy when you do it, the most important thing you could possibly do is develop a form of physical activity or exercise that you can start when you're young and that lasts throughout your whole lifespan. It really doesn't matter what you do. And like for me personally, I like exercising, I like strength training, and I like doing cardiovascular exercise. But maybe you like playing tennis. It doesn't matter. So figure out what works for you, and hopefully you can push off that frailty much further down the line than my father did. Thank you very much for listening, and have a good day.